Good day, everybody. This is Jody Orsi, and this is the For Freedom's Sake podcast. And I have with me today a friend of mine, Corinne Cline from Modesto, California. Welcome
Hi.
to the show, Corinne. I just wanted to give you a chance to just intro yourself, who you are. I guess you could explain how you know me.
Yeah.
I didn't do that when we started off, but you are my friend. You're more of a friend to Adrian. You guys go back a long ways, but just
Yeah.
so anyone listening or watching can kind of get a gauge for who you are. You're a mom to four. Is it four?
Yes. Four and an older boy that comes and goes that lives in Ukraine.
Oh yes, yeah,
So four, somewhat five.
yeah. So go ahead, Corinne. Give our listeners and our viewers just a glimpse of who Corinne Cline is.
Hi. Yeah. So I am a mom of four. I'm a former piano teacher and former second grade teacher. So I've been involved in education for a long time. And also very involved in adoption and fostering and stuff like that. So my husband's the main breadwinner, especially lately. The past 3 years, really, I've had severe medical issues, have been in and out of the hospital, 9 surgeries, months and months being bounced back and forth from hospital to hospital in Bay Area and Sacramento, California, where we live, and mostly to do with my kidney and just complete reconstruction, and it all stems from a birth defect that I had as a baby. I met Joe and Adrian way back. Adrian and I met in college. We did YWAM together, and we immediately became besties, and we've remained extremely close, like sisters, ever since. And then I got to be in Joe and Adrian's wedding when they got married, and that was just a really special time. And they recently came out to California with their 2 kids, and I got to see them then, and it was in the middle of all of my surgical stuff. So that was really cool to get to see Adrian during that time. I wasn't really seeing a lot of people, so that was really special. I've had chronic infections my entire life. I've been on antibiotics my entire life due to the kidney issues. And I'm down to 1 kidney now that doesn't work so well. So because of using antibiotics my entire life, it has put me at really high risk for infection. I've had every infection in the book. I've had C. diff, TB, chronic urinary tract infections, chronic kidney infections, and have turned septic multiple times, had near-death experience multiple times, and somehow I'm still here. So just trying to live this life the best I can, especially for our kids, to point them to the truth, to point them to the Lord, and make the most of the time that I do have, because every day I'm confronted with the reality that it could be my last. And so, yeah, that's just always part of my reality.
Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons we have you, and so Adrian and I, got the notice. I guess it was a couple of months ago now, that you, maybe it's not safe to say that you're not sure that you tested COVID-19 positive, but your doctor said that you had it. And as you just described, I mean, it's clear to us both that you would fit, although you're not old, obviously, which is part of the profile of the person that's most affected, by the virus. You certainly would be classified as immunocompromised.
Yes,
So
very much.
when we heard that, we were, obviously concerned and wanting to pray and wanting updates as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was your reality, much like, what you just described is your reality as well, health-wise. So
Yeah.
you're well now as regards the virus. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, what was your experience like in terms of finding out that you had it, your symptoms, the symptoms of the rest of your family, and then your trip to the hospital?
Yeah, it's really funny because we had planned on protecting me by going up to a cabin that my husband's parents have in the mountains and just escaping our town and trying to kind of isolate up there. And so we pulled the kids out of school early. We did all the things right, thinking that we were protecting me. And my daughter had recently had a neck sprain from gymnastics class. So she had been in and out of the hospital for physical therapy for the neck injury. And at some point, she definitely contracted what we think is the virus at the hospital, because when we got up to the cabin, we were there about a week before she got really sick. And her symptoms started with fever, vomiting, and diarrhea. So it was mostly in her stomach, but the fever too, and extreme sore throat. So we knew it's probably either COVID or the flu. And this was in March, early March. And so they weren't testing children yet at all, not in our area.
Mm-hmm.
And so her pediatrician said, isolate her, treat it as COVID. She definitely has the most common symptoms, and let's just keep her isolated for 14 days. So that's what we did. And then within those 14 days, or towards the end of the 14 days, is when my symptoms started, and they were exactly the same: extreme sore throat, fever, low grade though, it wasn't high, and the digestive issues. And so they had already tested me when Ellie was first tested, because at that time, if you were immunocompromised, you could get tested.
Uh-huh.
So I immediately got tested, and it showed that I didn't have it. And so I thought I was good, but then, I didn't have symptoms at that time. And so then once I developed the symptoms, I asked to be tested again, and they said, we don't have enough tests. We can't test you again. So I said, okay. And then about like the 4th or 5th day of the virus, I started getting extreme pain in my chest. And I also have a heart defect, and so I have to be careful with my heart. And when I called in to the doctor, they said, you need to go straight to the ER. So I went into the ER. I had hypertension. My blood pressure was really high, and thankfully they were able to test me there. So, and then, the doctor said, you have it. And then it went through pretty much every 14 days. It went through one of us, of the 6 of us that live in this house. The only one that didn't get it was my husband.
So you would maybe presume that Chad was asymptomatic, or probably?
That's what we think.
Yeah.
That's what we think.
So contextually, I don't know if I mentioned this, you're in Modesto, California, which is that mid-state?
It's Central Valley. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's about 2 hours southeast of San Francisco.
Okay. And as it turns out, California, I mean, obviously California is a highly populated state, but as it turns out, it's not really comparatively the epicenter that we thought it would be. When you look at the number of cases, it might be, in the top 5 or 10 in the country. But as far as the epicenter that it was billed from the beginning, that didn't really materialize.
No, it didn't. In fact, my surgeons are in San Francisco, and they had warned me ahead of time that they were preparing for this. I have some elective surgeries coming up. They put those off, all the things. They were preparing for massive influx of this pandemic, and it never happened really to what they were expecting.
Yeah. So Corinne, you listed your conditions, and so again, you would be a person that would be profiled as high risk. And you had what felt like a medium to high flu that ran its course, and then it affected everyone else in your family except for Chad.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I don't want to keep comparing it to the flu, but it seems comparable at this point.
The symptoms were comparable, yeah.
Okay. And the symptoms that you exhibited and all of your family members exhibited, they were COVID-19 symptoms that health officials had been talking about from the beginning, right?
Yeah. The only thing we never got was a severe cough.
Okay.
And I can't explain that, but the other symptoms, they were definitely in line with what they were finding.
Okay. And if you were to tune on the news from March until now, the scene that we saw, well, maybe not until now, but until a few weeks ago, the scene that we saw in these hospitals, these field hospitals, these testing facilities was like a panicky, overcrowded, overwhelmed, just problem. Okay. And
Yes.
that didn't really match your experience. Can you talk about that?
Right. It didn't. When I went to the hospital, they had at my hospital, I went to the nearest one, which I was instructed to do. And at that hospital, they had a COVID tent where if you said, I'm having, so I went in saying, I'm having chest pains and I have a virus, right? And they immediately said, well, you have to go straight to the COVID tent. And they were sending people there because they did not want anyone who could possibly have COVID to go into the main hospital or into the actual ER. So I was put in the COVID tent, and it was raining that day, so it was very cold. It was very wet. They had just set it up. Again, we had it really early on before anyone knew what was happening with this virus. There was a lot of panic in the news, a lot of panic among, people in our town. There's no doubt about it. And I went in there, they ran a bunch of tests. All the tests they did either in the tent, in the porta potty next to the tent, or literally just outside. Like I got my chest x-ray done outside because they did not want me to go into the main hospital facility. And it was very third worldish, I think, because they had just set up the tent. They didn't have all the equipment and all the things that they needed. The nurses didn't have the proper PPE, so they were stressed. Mind you, I've just spent 3 years going in and out of ERs and hospitals. I mean, countless times. And so most of these nurses I actually knew, and and they're always so friendly and so sweet, and they were stressed out. They were so stressed. Nobody wanted to be in the tent. They didn't have the proper PPE to protect themselves. So there was definitely like this air of panic in the tent. And the power even went out at one point, so they couldn't, they needed to do the EKG on me. They couldn't get it properly set up. I was literally just sitting in a folding chair. It was pretty wild. It was pretty wild. And all I could think was like, Lord, please get me out of here. I don't want to stay here. This is the most miserable. I mean, I know hospitals better than most people at my age, and it was the most miserable experience I've ever had. And it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just that, like, literally, like you said, there was such a state of panic. They were trying so hard to keep anyone that could possibly have it, isolated in this tent. And they just didn't have it properly set up at that point. And it was just madness. It was chaos. As far as the people coming in and out, there were a few people that came in with respiratory symptoms that were very elderly, and they were moved to the ICU. Everyone else was tested, checked out, sent home. I was there almost a full 24 hours, and half the time I was there, there was nobody with me. I was just sitting there in that folding chair. But it was it was just a very surreal experience, no question.
Yeah. So, we've been following it from Pennsylvania as well, and um, like over 2/3 of our fatalities in Pennsylvania, and we're among the highest. I was looking at the numbers yesterday. I think
Oh, wow.
Minnesota is the only state that actually trumps us in this statistic, and it's not a good statistic to lead the pack in. Is
Yeah.
over 2/3 of our mortalities happened in nursing homes, uh,
Yes.
which kind of underscores the number one, the people at the highest risk are people that are older who also have many times more than one or even two pre-existing conditions that are serious.
Yes.
And then the second thing being, why in the world were people that were positive being admitted back into nursing homes to infect more people, which was
Right. Right.
everyone in Pennsylvania is wondering why that happened, why that was medically a good choice, and why it was politically a good policy. But
Yeah.
the newest numbers, at least from my perspective, Corinne, and I'm citing CDC numbers, and the most official tables out there is earlier this week, or it might have been late last week, the overall mortality rate looked to be at about 0.4% for people who were symptomatic. And then, of course, that does not factor in the over 1/3 of cases where people are asymptomatic, like Chad presumably was. So
Yeah.
if you put those together, you're looking at a mortality rate for people that get the virus of about 1/4 of a percentage point, which we talked earlier about being comparable to the flu. Well, numbers wise, that's very comparable to the flu.
It is.
And it affects the same group of people, people that are older that have things going
Mm-hmm.
on already. So from your perspective, a person that was immunocompromised who got it, who thankfully recovered, have
Mm-hmm.
had California, has the nation as a whole just kind of dropped the ball and maybe overreacted on this thing?
I believe if you look at, like you said, the numbers, the statistics, we have enough data now. I think initially we didn't. And so I can understand, I was even panicked. I thought, oh my goodness, I've survived these past 3 years and this is going to take me out. But looking at all the data we have now, and especially after going through it myself, I do feel that leaders in this nation have overreacted significantly. I think that, like you said, we haven't protected the people that most needed to be protected, which is the elderly in rest homes. And that truly breaks my heart. Meanwhile, we've locked down everyone, kids, healthy people, and that's just never been done before. So it was kind of a giant worldwide experiment to see how does it go. And I do believe that there has been more negative than positive out of it. And it has affected people in so many ways. Even being immunocompromised and wanting people to take this virus seriously, for those of us that are, I still don't agree with how it was handled. I feel like it was overkill, and I feel like it didn't focus on the people like myself and the elderly that were truly the ones that it should have focused on. It just covered a large blanket over everybody, put everybody in a panic. Everybody has to suffer. And it's been a mess. I mean, it's just been a total disaster.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So my final question here for you is this. We're thousands of miles away, so I kind of have a pulse, at least on our region and the state of Pennsylvania, with regard to what people are thinking. Now, California is obviously California and New York are examples of why I thank God for the Electoral College. um, there are islands
Yeah.
where there's huge pockets of people that think a lot differently than everyone else in the country. Um,
Yeah.
as far as Modesto, and maybe if you did have a gauge for the state as a whole, what's the pulse there? Do they agree with what we're talking about? Are they pushing back against Governor Newsom? What's the scoop?
Yeah. It's pretty funny. There are definitely two Californias, and Central Valley is definitely more the part of California that is pushing back, saying enough is enough. We don't see enough evidence that this is helping at all. It's just causing more harm than good. And Central Valley is pushing back big time. Our counties have pushed back on Governor Newsom big time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on Mother's Day weekend, we were finally well enough to get out. We were done with all the quarantine, all of that. We ended up going to San Francisco. That was a different story. Mother's Day weekend in Central Valley, people were kind of getting out, not as many people wearing masks. And, it just kind of felt like life was somewhat starting to return to normal, or at least we were trying. When I went to San Francisco, I was shocked. Like, I've never seen it so empty. I've been to San Francisco my entire life. I've never seen it so empty. Hardly anyone on the streets. Businesses boarded up. If you saw someone on the street, they were wearing a mask. We weren't wearing masks that day, and we were literally looked at like wild animals. I mean, people were running from us. It was hilarious. And it was like stepping into another world. And I couldn't believe that just a 2-hour difference, a 2-hour drive, we saw such extreme polar opposites. We saw living life pushing back against the virus propaganda and just trying to move on in our town, versus San Francisco, where it was like a ghost town, and cops everywhere. We pulled over a few times just in a parking lot to try to figure out where we going to go. We had no idea it was that bad, that crackdown there. And we'd immediately have a cop pull over next to us and say, you need to move along. You can't pull over. You can't stop. It was intense. I was shocked. And my brother lives in LA, and LA has been very similar in how they handle it. Just extreme panic, extreme lockdown. You are not allowed to leave your house without a mask. You are not allowed to leave your house unless you're going to get groceries. That's pretty much it. And the people have been suffering big time. So LA and San Francisco are a different story.
Yeah.
The North and the South are a different story than the middle. The middle's handled it a little more like you guys, I think. So
yeah. So there's obviously been other casualties. In our county alone, here in York County, Corinne, as of a few weeks ago, we were up 300% in opioid overdose deaths. I saw an interesting statistical projection about each increment of unemployment that's sustained equals, a proportional increment of suicide deaths, and
yeah.
the numbers weren't encouraging. So
No.
you had mentioned rightly that, I think we reacted initially not knowing much, and I'm speaking nationally here, and that's not necessarily a bad thing to err on the side of caution, and then we never really recoiled after we got the information. Maybe some of the states are now. But I thought of one more question I wanted to ask you. In Pennsylvania, thankfully, there's been restrictions across the board, and not many Pennsylvanians agree with how our governor has handled things. But I will say this, as a church leader, there's been a lot of grace for churches. In fact, our governor never said that we couldn't meet. He encouraged us to use wisdom and mitigate. But we started meeting a couple weeks ago, and we've gotten I don't want to say no, but very limited pushback, and we're thankful for that.
Yeah.
at least from what I'm reading, that's not the case in California. Can you speak to that? What's the status of churches in California?
Right. There's definitely been more pressure on churches to stay closed, especially some of the larger ones. We happen to go to a larger one. My dad's actually a pastor at a larger church here, and it has been very, very hard. When, in general, people were pushing back against Governor Newsom's orders and saying, if you're going to start having regulations to open this and that, you need to include churches, because he just wasn't. And so he came out with new regulations for churches, thankfully. But for the larger churches, they really don't work, because it has to be under 100 people per building. And our church runs about 4,000 to 5,000. And it's a huge facility. So this has been heartbreaking for churches. I personally know they're having to, churches are having to lay off staff. I'm concerned that some of them will never open their doors again fully. And it has just been devastating for churches. I do question sometimes whether the churches in California are getting more of a target, or if this has somehow morphed into something where the government is trying to gain control over the churches of what they can and can't do. And it's just, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it pans out, as we are literally just now being able to slowly open under these very strict guidelines. If these guidelines don't let up, I think that will show the world where this is heading. If they open up the guidelines, let's say in another month, there haven't been that many COVID deaths and the numbers have definitely gone down, and they say, okay, it's over, let's take these guidelines off the churches. That would be common sense. If they don't do that, then we have a way bigger problem going on in California than just a virus. So
yeah. Well, we definitely, this is an appeal to pray for churches across the land, but specifically anyone that's watching or listening for California.
It's very disheartening. It really is. It just seems so wrong, but we've been stripped of so much of our ability to do anything about it. It's just, especially these larger churches that, if they don't follow the guidelines, they're going to be sued. So it's it's hard. It's really hard right now to know what to do.
Yeah, we have the sense here that things that were done before and things that were normal to us before, we're probably not ever going to go back there. And it more underscores and highlights just a total dependence on God. And I don't think that thing, but it seems like our hands are being forced. But we have this book of Acts that I keep looking at, and our church at large is having a look at it, and
that's awesome.
It's an encouragement, because they didn't have huge auditoriums, and they certainly had a lot of persecution. So
yeah, believe it or not, Acts is what me and my husband and kids are reading through each morning, and I've been having them memorize some of the verses of where the disciples talk about how they consider it a joy to be persecuted for Christ, and they consider it a joy to, go through suffering for Christ, as the early church was. And I've just been really feeling like God wants me to impress that on my children, because I don't know where this is heading, and I'm not liking where it's heading. I feel like God's warning us. And so as a mom, I'm trying to prepare my kids for what's coming and really equip them with truth. But it's funny you mentioned Acts, because that's exactly what we've been reading. So
yeah, it's definitely timely for right now. So
it is.
Corinne, would you stay on the line after I hit stop? because I want to pray for you, and I don't want
Oh,
that
thank you.
necessarily be on the broadcast. But I wanted to
Okay.
thank you for your time today in just testifying to your experiences and what you're feeling and thinking and considering out there. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. So Corinne Cline from Modesto, California, everyone. Okay, that took a while for me to find the record button. It's a
I
good.
think, is it still recording? Because I see it on mine.
Oh, maybe it is.
I'm technologically challenged, so